Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Optimizing the Utility Workforce with Digital Tools and Collaboration Capabilities, sponsored by Burns & McDonnell. I'm David Pazaricki with T&D World and Endeavor Business Media. To begin, let me explain how to participate in today's presentation. First of all, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please put your concerns in the questions window and our technical experts will assist you. We recommend disabling any pop-up blocking software or extensions in your browser, as these can cause issues with the webinar player. Additionally, we welcome your questions during today's event. We will answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session that will follow the main presentation, but please feel free to send in questions at any time during the presentation. To do so, simply type your questions in the questions window on the side of your screen and hit the Submit button. Also, please be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available in the T&D World website within 24 hours. You will be notified via email when the archive is available. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Zachary Waschenberg is a product manager in the Burns & McDonnell's Transmission and Distribution Division. He specializes in innovative products and solutions for electric and gas utilities. Zachary currently manages Burns & McDonnell's Wearable Technology, Digital Workforce Initiative, and Innovation Program. He has been responsible for building a digital workforce and video collaboration platform which supported asset documentation, digital work processes, and field-to-office video conference calling. During the COVID pandemic, this platform added over $5 million of worth to Burns & McDonnell's projects. Prior to his product manager role, Zachary was a substation engineer for 5 years and was responsible for 5 engineer, procure, construct substation products. Joining Zachary today is Gary McAuliffe. Gary is Librestream's VP of Global Utilities, where he enables workforce transformation on the front lines of the utility business. With deep domain knowledge in the utility sector, including advanced metering, distribution automation, demand response, building automation, distributed energy resources, and regulatory economics, he enjoys aligning technology capabilities to the unique needs and goals of the utility sector. Now, over to you, Zachary.
Thanks, David. And Gary, thanks for joining me. I hope the weather in North Carolina's nice fall weather. It warmed up here in Kansas City a little bit over the past few days, but I think we'll make it through the heat wave before we finally cool down for the fall time weather here.
Today in North Carolina, beautiful.
Perfect. So as David mentioned, I'm Zachary Waschenberg, and I have the pleasure of having our partner from Librestream, Gary, with me here today. Great introduction on who we are, what we do together. We've come in partnership as 2 companies to talk to you a little bit about digital solutions and collaboration technologies. And to bring us over to our agenda, I'll hand it off to Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Zachary. And by the way, Zachary gave me the opportunity when I first met him to either call him Zach or Zachary. And I typically tend to toggle between the two. Since today's a little bit more of a formal setting, I'll try to stick with Zachary, but we'll see how it goes. I'm sure I'll screw it up at some point during the conversation today. Hey, listen, I really want to thank everyone for joining the call today. As David mentioned, I'm Gary McAuliffe, and I lead the utility sector for Librestream. Before we get started, though, I did want to take just a moment to thank Zachary and really the entire team at Burns & McDonnell for hosting today's webinar. We're really excited to come to you live today from the T&D World platform and really appreciate you joining. I also wanted to thank Burns & McDonnell more broadly for our partnership that we really just publicly announced last week. Burns & McDonnell is without a doubt the top engineering and EPC firm in the utility sector, and we're really honored that they are representing our on-site digital worker platform to the utility industry as well as several other critical industries critical infrastructure industries that they support. So let's talk a little bit about our agenda today. We will begin by just a brief introduction of each of our respective companies. Then we'll talk a little bit about what is necessitating workforce transformation within the utility sector. From there, we'll introduce this concept, or a concept we call a knowledge network, and talk about some very specific industry use cases. At the end, we'll do a deeper dive on one of those use cases, NERC FAC 08 inspections. And I'll let Zachary tell you a little bit more about FAC 08 and kind of how is leveraged in the utility industry a little bit later in the presentation. But suffice it to say that we think this is a really good representation of how to leverage digital worker solutions and knowledge networks to really improve task efficiency, data collection, and dramatically reduce the time that your frontline employees are spending solving problems and even logging and writing reports. So let's do a quick introductions of each of our respective companies. Zach, why don't you introduce Burns & McDonnell to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Gary, and thanks for the kind words. It's always good to know a partner is willing to say those things about myself and my company publicly to everyone. So Burns & McDonnell, many of you may know us from our engineering and construction services. We're very proud of our history as a company. We were established a very long time ago in 1898, and we're happy to have been 100% employee-owned for many years now. It's one thing that we always like to point out. We feel like it brings additional quality to our projects to be able to say that the people that are working on your projects have a vested interest in the success of the project because we own the success and we are employee owners. We have offices across the world. We're primarily in North America, but we do have offices in the UK, India, and other major countries throughout the world. And today, while engineering is an important topic for this presentation, I'm going to focus a little bit more on our consulting and technology side. And that's why Librestream and Burns & McDonnell have come together on these types of partnerships and technology solutions. Burns & McDonnell brings a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the people in the field, the boots on the ground, you, our customers. We work with you day in and day out, and we understand the pain points, the frustrations that you see when it comes to project execution, operations, maintenance of capital-intensive projects, and to maintain critical infrastructure like the electric and gas utilities that we rely so heavily on. And we want to bring that experience and help merge the gap between the technology and you, our customers, so that way it's an easy decision to pick up the technology and it's an easy lift for you. We're here to support you on that. And I think that might be a good transition point to pass it over to Gary and let him talk a little bit about what Librestream is and who they serve.
Yeah, thanks, Zachary. So Librestream's focused on that 80% of the global workforce that does not sit behind a desk. You know, we're not focused on the carpeted spaces, but the concrete, dirt, and asphalt floors of the industrial front lines. You know, we delivered the first to market augmented reality solution to this deskless workforce. And really, candidly, we did it before the term augmented reality was really even appearing in the space. The domain knowledge we've had or built over the last 18 years has been in partnership with a deep roster of hundreds of customers, including companies like Volvo and Pratt Whitney, Rolls-Royce, et cetera. And today, we're the most widely deployed solution in the market. Customers are currently leveraging our platform in over 120 countries around the globe. I joined Librestream actually in February. Evergy Ventures, the VC arm of the Midwest utility Evergy, invested in Librestream, and I was brought in to really focus and grow our focus in the utility sector. And we're doing that on a global basis. And this partnership with Burns & McDonnell is really a key component of that focus. So I think now we want to talk a little bit about some industry, we'll call it pain points, but really more pain points may be better said as like drivers for workforce transformation, as well as kind of introduce the concept of knowledge networks. So Zach, I'll let you take it from here. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the critical things that are happening in the utility industry.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So we're going to show you some statistics here that we are seeing actively in our industries, and kind of try to weave a narrative here because it is very easy at times to become disconnected from numbers. But when we've got some actual examples that we're seeing, it helps to solidify those in our mind and bring a story around them that we can all come to terms with. So when it comes to upskilling, quickly training the workforce, and when it comes to retirement, those two statistics come hand in hand. So 3/4 of utility leaders are concerned about the ability to bring their workforce up to speed more quickly, and up to 40% of the utility workforce is eligible for retirements here in the near future. And this is something Burns and McDonnell has seen through our work with the utilities. We've seen accelerated retirement programs come through. Much of that work tends to go towards engineering consulting firms such as Burns and McDonnell, but we see those statistics picking up speed, and I suspect that much of the utility workforce will retire even before 2030. So this is something where it can be easy to disconnect yourself from it. Gary is going to talk here in a little bit about knowledge networks, which is a newer term. Think about this as the people around you. When you go into the office, and this is true at Burns and McDonnell, I was a design engineer for 5 years. When you have a question, maybe it's engineering related, maybe it's operations and maintenance related, you know that Sarah in the engineering department has your answer. She's the go-to for all things engineering. She's got 30+ years of experience, and anytime there's that odd question, you know you can go to her. Or maybe it's Phil. Phil's in operations and maintenance, and there's a breaker out of service. The breaker was put into service in 1950. We've got to get it back online here in the next hour, otherwise it's going to cause issues. Those are the people that surround you. They're your local network that helps support your career. As those people start to retire, and we're starting to see this at Burns and McDonnell too, I think less to the extent that the industry at large is seeing, but the two individuals I always used to go to were Dave and Mike. Dave is now retired. He's having a great time with his grandkids, but I have one less resource that I can go to. These statistics are impactful. We're starting to see these, and if you think a little bit about the people around you within your network, the people that you talk to day to day, that is your knowledge network. They're the people that you rely on to help get your job done. Those people are retiring, and we need to have an ability to bridge that gap, to have a solution as those people leave the workforce. And so those two statistics are really at the root of today's presentation. There's also a lot of talk around reducing operations and maintenance. A lot of utilities are feeling the squeeze to reduce O&M spend. Technologies like these can really help with that. They can help increase people's ability to more quickly understand how to do their task, to get support when they do need that support in the field, and to gather that information and to send it in a more streamlined, effective way. I always want to talk more on safety here, but we don't have a long time. I could spend the entire time for today's presentation on safety. It's near and dear to my heart. My father is a safety manager for a small town grain mill, and he's had the misfortune of being a part of some difficult times from a safety perspective. It impacts the community when we lose a person. These aren't just numbers anymore. These are men and women in the community that mean a lot to their family and friends. When we spend more time in the field, we are inherently creating more opportunities for risk. The faster someone can get their job done, the faster they can get an answer to a question, the less time they spend in the field. And the less time they spend in the field, the less time something is likely to happen. With technologies like what we're going to show you and talk to you about today, we're also going to be able to reduce truck rolls. The fewer times a vehicle leaves the office or a warehouse, the fewer times a vehicular incident is likely to happen. If you look at insurance for all industries, but especially the utility industry, the top insurance claim is going to be around vehicular incidents. If we're able to reduce our truck rolls, we're going to decrease our vehicular incident rate and making our industry at large a safer place. So that's one of the things I want to end on as I hand it over to Gary. This at its core is a safety technology there's so much more to it than that. But I always tell people, leave this presentation knowing that this will make your people that you work with safer, more productive, and better at the work that they do. So with that, I'll hand it over to Gary to talk a little bit more about knowledge networks and how they can apply to this technology.
Yeah, thanks, Zachary. So, this concept of knowledge networks, what is it? Well, we believe really the best way to address some of these transformation challenges is a knowledge network. And a knowledge network, it basically captures key field interactions using the existing workforce, contextualize all of the information with appropriate tags, and then curate and analyze that content using advanced artificial intelligence, really with the goal of delivering knowledge when and where it's needed, basically in any environment and on any device. In the industrial or utility setting, these environments can be really harsh, and sometimes we have limited bandwidth, huge temperature ranges, and often difficult to reach locations. We must be able to get information to the workers basically wherever they are. And as you can imagine, this preservation of knowledge in the utility industry is really essential to combat this knowledge loss that Zach mentioned, and is really a critical element of how we think about institutionalizing knowledge. Plus, as we bring on this new workforce, though they will likely be a little more technically savvy, they're also likely to be more transient. I mean, the days where the majority of the utility workforce stayed for 30 or 40 years really are gone. And so we must institutionalize knowledge that was often kept in the heads of those longtime workers that Zach mentioned, and make that available to the new workforce, because they're likely going to have far less time in the field. As we see it, there are kind of three core elements to a knowledge network. The first is remote expert assistance. With remote expert assistance, a worker in the field trying to solve a problem can be immediately connected to an expert that can help them with that resolution. I mean, the expert could be their boss, a colleague, maybe a design engineer, somebody in the operations center, or even the manufacturer of the actual equipment that they're servicing. The idea here is that we provide a digital collaboration environment, allowing them to solve problems without the need to dispatch that expert to the site or into the field. I mean, this can result in tremendous savings of time, travel expense, potentially system downtime. If you need that expert to get to a system where the system is actually down, it can even keep your system uptime levels, very much higher. And obviously, COVID really demonstrated to all of us that even in those times where we would like to dispatch that expert to the field, we may not be able to get them there. So we have to be able to provide this remote expert assistance or this remote assistance to whoever happens to be, in the field at the time that we're needing to solve problems. The second element of a knowledge network is this idea of the preservation of the interactions and the management of all the relevant content. By keeping a record of a particularly difficult fix, or giving worker to access to things like as-built, maybe short training videos, and even critical maintenance records, we can really improve the delivery of service in the field. And we want to learn from what's happening in the field, so knowledge preservation is really the key to harvesting a lot of those learnings. And I think we would all agree we're probably in the really early days or early innings of what's possible with artificial intelligence. And by capturing these interactions today, we really create the opportunity to leverage advanced AI to improve the entire service delivery process. We're working with one utility as an example that their entire goal was just to capture interactions as they built or kind of built a generator rewind and overhaul of one of their hydro stations. This is like a once in every 35-year project, and they really wanted to leverage this knowledge network to preserve all the interactions that happened as they did this project. And the third element of the knowledge network is really this concept of digital work instructions. And I think, we probably all agree that the time for paper-based procedures or procedures that are stuck in the heads of the veteran employees is really past. We really need to be able to provide digital step-by-step instructions to help our workforce more efficiently solve problems and really conduct their daily tasks. With modern digital tools, we can really eliminate steps and dramatically reduce some of the traditional reporting efforts that's required of our frontline workers. Think about it this way, why do we need our employees to document their location when a simple GPS-enabled picture can deliver the exact location directly into their reports? Why do we need to provide typed or handwritten notes on what they've done when they can do dictation and easily accommodate the ability for our workers to work hands-free? And why do we need the employee to identify a particular piece of equipment that they're working on when we've got advanced AI tools like object character recognition and computer vision that can identify not only the exact equipment that they're working on, but all of the key records and maintenance information that may be attached to that equipment? These tools in the hands of our workers can really speed up the resolution and almost eliminate the need for them to go back to the truck or back to the office or operations center and write and log reports. So let's hop into some specific kind of use cases, if you will, around how we can deploy knowledge networks and these capabilities. Zach, maybe I'll turn it over to you, kind of let you open up this part of this section.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So I've been working with Gary now for, it feels like a year or two, but it's only been 6 months as we kind of crawl our way out of the COVID pandemic. Before the pandemic, I had been deploying solutions, as we're going to show you here today, throughout Burns and McDonnell. We happen to have been at an enterprise level when COVID hit, but I do have tremendous experience in deploying these types of use cases. And I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, I'm here, Burns and McDonnell is here to help support you in maybe the gaps and the potholes that come with deploying newer technologies like these. You can see a lot of different use cases I've put together here. You'll notice that many of them are wrapped around this idea of the digital work process, and that to me is a key takeaway as Gary and I talk to you about many of these use cases. Your users are fatigued from video calls. Before video calling was the new normal, before COVID, not very many people honestly wanted to use new things. Change management's difficult. Now everyone's fatigued by video calling. They don't want to get on a video call if they don't have to. They want to have face-to-face interactions if it's possible. My recommendation is to always start with a digital work process as your core use case. Now, the video calling, being able to get remote assistance, will give you the largest return on your investment. But if people aren't going to use it, you're not going to get that return. When they have daily usage of the technology through a digital work process, it could be an inspection, it could be an audit, it could just be taking photos of the work that they're doing as they perform that work. Giving them that exposure to the technology in a daily setting will give them a level of comfort. So that way, when they do have a question, they know that that technology is available to help them answer that question. So these are a lot of the use cases that we've thought of, almost all of which we've deployed actively on project level settings or with utility customers. And we do want to dive a little bit deeper into some of these before we get to the FAC 08 one. So the first one we want to get into is around gas line inspections. This is one that a electric and gas utility came to us on. They really liked some of the wearable technology that had an intrinsic rating where it could be brought into potentially explosive environments. Many of the gas line inspections are classified under that scenario. They have to go out, they have to inspect this aging infrastructure. They have to document when new valves, new regulators go into service. That has traditionally been a pen and paper based process because of the nature of the work that they do. It's in a potentially explosive environment. You can't just bring a regular cell phone. So there's a wearable technology on the market that does have that intrinsic rating. And they really liked the idea of pairing that wearable technology with a digital work process where they could take photos of the work as they're doing it. We could have step-by-step guidance to make sure that the quality and consistency was there in the work process. A lot of these natural gas pipelines were going to be underground. The only time that there's an opportunity to take photos of that distribution underground setting is when you've dug up the piping to get exposure to add equipment to it. And so being able to take those photos before it was put back below grade, being able to document that, and more importantly, being able to streamline all of this information into a report. That's something Gary and I will touch on a couple of times through this presentation. These work processes are being sent up to an environment, either a private cloud, an on-premises server, or just a general secure cloud environment. And then from that, we can create automatic reporting around it. And as we thought through this use case with this particular customer, we realized when it comes to the actual inspection itself, gathering that information, putting it into a report, and submitting that report, you could potentially see up to a 3-time increase in inspections performed. So a pretty massive return on investment just from the digital work instruction. We did not consider for this particular use case what the ramifications of video calling remote expertise would be. This was built around specifically the use case of getting that digital process put into the field, into potentially explosive environments where they had to use pen and paper. So a really good use case, I think, across the industry could be deployed when it comes to inspections, but especially with this gas line inspection. And Burns and McDonnell sat down with that customer, analyzed what their current process was, worked with Librestream on that, and we feel like we've put together a good solution for them. So that's gas line inspections. For our next use case around vegetation management, I'll hand it off to Gary for him to talk a little bit about some of the things he's seen when it comes to vegetation management.
Yeah, thanks, Zachary. So vegetation management is a huge, huge challenge for utilities. Utilities spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 to $8 billion globally clearing vegetation from overhead lines. It's often the largest single line item in many utilities' O&M budget and can have some really serious consequences if it's not maintained. Typically, the vegetation management process takes 3 steps where the utility must kind of assess what needs to be cut. There's a cutting phase, and then obviously a QA/QC step to make sure that the correct trees and vegetation was cut, and often to deal with landowner complaints when they weren't. Typically, all 3 steps require the utility to either send their people or third-party contractors into the field. And we believe by leveraging this knowledge network concept, the assessment phase, that first phase, can be done a lot more effectively. I mean, traditionally, the assessment phase, people, often arborists, will walk utility lines and literally put a stamp on a particular tree that needs to be cut. With advanced knowledge network and a lot of the capabilities, we can add a lot more context, illustration, annotation, and really help define what needs to happen in the cutting phase. And this can definitely speed up that phase. But we think probably the biggest gains can actually be done in the QA/QC step. We think we can do this 100% remotely by connecting the cutting teams to the QA/QC inspectors that sit back in the office. The QA/QC inspectors can then work with several cutting teams at once, and they become basically the remote expert guiding the cutting team through any questions or confusions. We think this can actually reduce the trips to the field by 10 to 15%, dramatically improve the quality, avoid a lot of the customer or landowner complaints, and save millions of dollars in the process. Another key one that's, and again, this is a little bit more on the safety line item, is within the nuclear plant. There's a concept called ALERA, which is basically the desire for nuclear utilities to reduce the radiation exposure on their employees by as low as they possibly can. And really, this is a critical element of safety for those that work in nuclear plants. But there's also a pretty tremendous financial burden on the utility to manage these processes. We've seen some utilities claim, upwards of $10,000 or more per unit of dose exposure in management costs associated with this. So, how do we solve that leveraging a knowledge network and some of these capabilities? One, by deploying a remote expert solution, we can actually reduce the number of people that have to go in the plant. Often, when people are doing work in the nuclear plant, there's a person that goes in the plant to do the work, and then a person that goes in to do the peer inspection. Obviously, if we can reduce the need to send that second person in by doing remote peer inspections, we often can reduce, in that situation, the dose exposure by as much as 50%. We can also digitize, as Zach has mentioned. I knew I would do a Zach at some point. As Zachary has mentioned, we can also digitize the work procedures in a way that can speed up their time in the plant, therefore reducing exposure. And then finally, we can integrate critical IoT data and really plant information to give the worker access to that information. I mean, it may be as simple as explaining or delivering radiation exposure risk from different equipment in the plant. And so by literally moving or standing in a different part of the plant, the worker can actually reduce the dose exposure. In working with our initial utilities on some of these use cases, we see the potential to reduce nuclear radiation dose exposure by as much as 20%, and in the process, save tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in management costs. So really big hitter as we look at not only a safety but financial impact of the exposure of nuclear radiation. All right, so let's transition into the kind of the core use case for our conversation today, and talk a little bit about NERC and particularly NERC FACO 8. Zachary, I think I'm going to let you do this part if you want to hop in.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I won't hold you screwing up my name against you too much. So, Burns and McDonnell, we work with our customers on FACO 8 audits quite frequently. We get a tremendous number of requests for proposals on this type of audit work. A little bit of background, this all came out of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. It was to make sure in this specific FACO 8 audit that the ampacity of the equipment in the field was documented and is correct to the as-built. So many of our utility customers did not have what I would call ampacity diagrams outlining all of the different ampacity ratings of their equipment. And for those that did have the ampacity diagrams, as we all know, red lines aren't always picked up properly, changes happen in the field, and those ampacity ratings may change as equipment gets swapped out, and that needs to be documented properly. So that's the focus of this use case. We see this as, I guess there is no such thing as a silver bullet, but if it comes to implementing this technology, this is as close to a silver bullet as utilities are going to get for deploying this type of technology. There's a couple of reasons we say that. There's a great reason to use the work process, digital work process, for gathering all of this data. These RFPs that Burns and McDonnell is receiving, everyone in the industry is receiving. To be fully honest, I don't know if there's enough labor in the utility industry to get all of this work done in a timely manner, because every single component has to be confirmed in the field. If there's any issues, photos have to be taken. And so you're looking at hundreds of thousands to millions of components per utility that need to be documented. The difficult part isn't necessarily the people in the field. That work can be executed. It's what do you do with all of this documentation? You might have red lines, you might have photos, they might be in different places. Different subcontractors may perform the work differently. All of that information has to be reported on back up the food chain to NERC properly. So all of this comes together. You think about questions that come up, being able to have remote expertise answer those questions in a timely manner, standardize on a work process across subcontractors as well as your internal utility employees. We see this as close to a silver bullet as you can get. And oh, by the way, it's probably capitalizable because it is in performance to a NERC request. So you're getting two birds with one stone. You're improving the efficiency of your operations, and you're getting a rate of return on that capitalized software technology. And so what we see is much higher than 20%, but we tried to be conservative when we looked at these, but a 20% improvement in data capture and reporting time. If your current process is red lines, which many of our requests that we get are saying, give us red lines, this could be as high as 200%. We tried to be conservative on this. It just depends on the process you implement. And we've actually put together for you today here a actual demonstration of what this could look like on these types of software technologies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually switch over to my phone that will be shared through my desktop. I'll walk you through the digital work process from the cell phone app, and then I'll show you as that data is collected, it is uploaded to a dashboard. I'll show you what that dashboard looks like and what it's like when that information comes together in a consolidated automatic reporting setting. This is all going to be on a standalone platform. The thing that we always encourage is that as you go down the process of piloting these technologies and you're looking towards an enterprise level solution, we always encourage you to look towards integrations. Every utility and every organization has an SAP system, a Maximo system. At the end of the day, you're going to want this data to flow to those systems. That can be done with an integration. And so that's one thing I want you to think about in the long run. But what we will show you is a standalone solution that you could deploy on a pretty massive scale. We always just like to kind of set longer term visions as we talk through some of these things. So with that, I'm going to switch over, and I would ask Dave, you just let me know.
I see it.
Okay. So what you're seeing is my cell phone here, so I'll activate my cell phone, and I'll open the app. We have our FAC 08 walk down here with quick access. You'll notice that the video calling is always available here in the top right corner. I've already seen one question come in about low connectivity. This particular platform that we're showing you works in extremely low bandwidth environments across cellular networks or local networks. As long as you have a connection to the internet, it'll work in extremely low environments. That's one thing that as you analyze vendors, you'll need to consider is what type of environmental situations you're going to be in. For most utilities, you're going to need the capability for extremely low bandwidth situations. When it comes to the digital work processes, these, for this particular platform, can be downloaded locally to my device, which is what I'm working on here, and they can be done offline. And then once you've collected your day's worth of data, maybe you go back into the office that evening, you can upload it once you get back online. If you do have connection as you're walking through this, it will automatically upload. So there will be very little lag time between the information being collected in the field and then the office being able to view those reports. So I'll start by clicking here on the FAC 08 walkdown we've put together. Maybe. Live demonstrations always go as planned. As I get my cell phone up and running here again, basically what we would walk you through is the ability to take photos, select from a drop-down menu, and be able to walk through a process here. My cell phone appears to have crashed, and as I reboot it here, we'll see here. So, yep, as a typical live demonstration goes, it has crashed, but that's okay. Basically what we would have walked you through is a process to gather the FAC 08 information, upload that data, but what we can show you here is what it would look like on the dashboard. So this is the dashboard we've actually put together in the event that this happened, a work order that we've already put together. This is one I walked through this morning. So this would have been the work process. We would have entered a substation identification number. That would have been, in my case, 42S. We would have selected from a voltage class, which there would have been 3 options, 115 kV, 230 kV, and 500 kV. Those are the critical infrastructure for the particular utility that we were demonstrating this for. There were 3 different issue types. There was an incorrect component, there was a correct component in the wrong location, and then there was a missing component. So for a FACO 8 audit, you need to be able to determine, okay, is the asset in the field the wrong component? Maybe it's in the right place, but the drawing set doesn't have it there. Or maybe we just need to completely update the drawing set. And then we would be able to take a photo of the marks on the drawing. So this is the photo that I took that would be readily available. So typical drawing, being able to put a red line there, take a photo of that particular red line, and then upload that photo with the system. So that way, if we do need to update the drawing set, we've got the red line image here of the drawing, being able to look at what that looks like. And then the final one would be a photo of the actual component. If you do have a GPS signal, it does take a photo, a GPS marker of that, so you can actually link to the location of where that photo was taken. So if you have a GIS integration, you have the ability to share this. So be it Maximo, SAP, whatever it is, that's what it would look like from a geotagging perspective. We can zoom in on that photo if we want to. So we can upload it, look at it in more detail here. So we've got a disconnect switch at the very top of the lattice tower. And then we do have notes on this. So these are just notes that can be tagged over from a metadata standpoint and shared in the system. The red lines, you may have noticed the red lines had that specific text to them, but when a red line photo is taken, that text isn't shareable through a typical system. So you could just add that as a secondary note. And then again, this can all be automatically PDF'd. So we can download this PDF and take a look at it. These PDFs can be custom built. So if you have a standard report, we can do that standard report for you. But in this case, it's just the template report. And it looks like I finally got my phone up and running again. So if my phone doesn't crash when I plug it in here, I'm going to see if I can actually walk you through this for real this time. Give it one last try here. All right, there we go. Third time's the charm. So we'll launch that app. Just to walk you through what this process is going to look like, I'll click on the walk down. Notice there is versioning control here, and this is downloaded locally. So this is version 2, but it's the 3rd version. So that means that version 0 was the starting version, which is handy whenever you're updating. So this is the job name. We can keep this as is, or we can do things like adding a particular work order to it. So maybe I want to say this is work order number 123. And so it will rename that in the system as work order 123. We can enter a substation identifier. So in this case, maybe I want to do substation 56S in our system. selecting a voltage class. In this case, I'll just pick 230 kV. This is one step that I didn't go over. You can actually take instances that have happened in the past. So Gary and I have talked about knowledge networks. Knowledge networks, whenever you're doing remote guidance through a process, you're capturing that knowledge. Now you want to be able to reinsert that captured knowledge back into a work process for just-in-time training. So this is actually a video clip of a FAC 08 walkdown that we've done in the field, and we can say, hey, if you need a refresher on how to classify the different types of issues, this is a video that you can watch. It's a 1-minute video to give you a refresher on that. So that's what I'll actually do now. I'll click on it. It'll pull open that video, and this is a video. There's some narration behind it. This was an actual video in the field of a FAC 08 walkdown where they're talking through different types of issues, and it's giving the people in the field the ability to have that just-in-time training. Whenever they're done with it, they can just go back one screen. They've said that they've watched the instructional video, and they can go to the next step. So the next step is selecting an issue type. So the video just gave them that just-in-time training. They're able to identify that there is an issue on the drawing, an incorrect component issue. We're going to take a photo of the actual drawing mark with the camera on my phone. So I've got my 11 by 17 drawing set. I'll take a photo of my red line, add that to our work process. We'll go to the next step. There's component photos that we want to add. So I'm going to add a component photo that we saw. I'm going to choose it as an existing photo from my device. So maybe if you have a high resolution optical zoom camera that's sending photos over to your handheld device because you need optical zoom, that's one thing with FAC 08. You need to be able to get nameplate photos of equipment that's very high up in the air, and you can only do that with optical zoom camera. Being able to choose that as an existing photo from your device is nice. And then being able to add notes to the audit. So in this case, I'm going to use my verbal commands here to expedite the process. The ampacity should be 2,000 amps, not 2,500 amps. Update the drawing accordingly. And then we've completed the process. So we went a little bit in backwards order there. We showed you what it looks like when it gets into the back-end system, what it's like when you actually follow the process on a cell phone. And then if we want to look, we can check if it's uploaded. There it is right there in our system. It's been uploaded. It takes a little bit for it to PDF, but here's all that information we gathered. So that's a typical FAC 08. Occasionally, you run into technical issues like we do because we're giving a live webinar presentation. I can assure you that that only happens when you're trying to present in front of 100 people, not necessarily when you're in the field. With that, I'll stop sharing and we'll hand it back off for questions.
Yeah, one comment, Zachary, that was, thanks for doing that. And I think if you think through what he just did, you can also see a case or a capability to add the remote expert elements in here as well. So if you're in the field and you have a question about what you're seeing, being able to pipe in somebody that has maybe more expertise for that particular area, all from the same basic work process and call, and be able to get advice as part of that process. So they are all kind of all these elements in the knowledge network are complementary. At the end of the day, the goal is basically to provide as much information and expertise to that person in the field so they can move more quickly and more safely through their day. David, are you there?
I am. I might have missed my cue. A few of you have already submitted questions, so we're going to jump right in. If you'd like to submit a question, please do so now by typing that question in your questions window on the side of your screen and hitting submit. So, guys, we have one. One of the first questions we have is: are most customers using wearable devices or leveraging traditional devices?
I can take that one. So at Burns and McDonnell, we've used both. What we see is, and what we recommend is that most customers, if they do a pilot, a proof of concept, that they deploy at least one wearable device, so that way they can see a side-by-side comparison. Typically, wearable devices are going to give you an extra advantage in terms of efficiency, as well as safety, because you're hands-free. And so you're not constantly putting down your cell phone or tablet and picking it back up. It's just attached to your hard hat. You're able to do the step-by-step guidance. You're able to do the remote assistance in a hands-free environment and continue to perform your work. Now, that said, what we typically see is the vast majority of our utility customers use their current fleet of devices. No one's going to immediately just switch over and purchase 10,000 wearable devices. So what we see is most utilities and most of our customers start with their current cell phones and tablets that they have deployed to the field. And then over time, they start to deploy more and more wearable devices as they go forward. What we think will happen is that probably over the next 5 years, foremen and crew leads will have wearable devices. They're the ones typically answering questions. And then maybe over the next 10 to 15 years, the typical employee in the field will start to get more and more wearable devices. So that's what we've seen thus far.
All right, thank you. The next question we have is: what tools are you leveraging for remote expert assistance? Now, we've seen photos of cell phones, headsets, iPads, etc. As an add-on, what do you do to handle poor network connections? And I think you may have addressed part of that in your presentation, but of course, it may bear reiterating.
Yeah, I mean, Zachary, I can kind of, and you feel free to kind of fill in. Obviously, as we showed you in the work instructions element, we have the ability to integrate remote expert capabilities directly into the on-site platform. And we do see our customers, kind of in reference to the last question, use a variety of devices as part of that solution. Because Librestream has been so focused in the industrial sector and environments that can be particularly harsh. As an example, we do a lot in the oil and gas space, and literally sometimes we have to enable our technology on a platform in the middle of the North Sea or the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. We've built a lot of capabilities within the platform to deal with low bandwidth environments. I mean, some of our oil platforms can only give us 50 kilobits per second of bandwidth, and we have to be able to accommodate that in the interactions within our platform. So it's a very important element and a very critical component of designing these types of capabilities for the industrial setting, because it's just not the same as those carpeted spaces that we're generally used to in the traditional work environment. So it's a really critical element of what we do.
All right, thank you, Gary. The next question we have is: we are a Microsoft shop. How does the solution compete or work? How does the solution compete or work with Microsoft solutions?
I'll take that one too, Zachary, if you're good. And I think it's a great question. I mean, we get this a lot. Obviously, Microsoft has been particularly successful in the utility sector. Most shops have at least some flavor of Microsoft, and obviously, over the last year and a half, that has typically involved a lot of implementation of Microsoft Teams. So a lot of times we get questions on how does our platform or our technology map. And one of the things you'll find is that we are very, very tightly tied to the Microsoft tool set. We can integrate from our platform directly from a Teams call, so that not only can you leverage the capabilities that may already be inherent within the utility customer, like a Teams environment, but you can actually patch into the more industrial strength version of our solution out at the edge. But we also integrate with Microsoft in a number of other ways. We are integrations to Dynamics, integrations to other elements of the Microsoft tool set. A lot of our cloud-based solutions are held within Azure. So we very much are a complementary service or solution to elements within Microsoft, up into including even the their newest wearable device, the HoloLens 2. We were one of the first to launch a full integration of our platform to HoloLens 2. So we believe Microsoft's a really key partner of ours and part of a critical element of what we do.
All right, great. And our final question is, will FAC 008 eventually get into distribution?
Yeah, I can take that one. So you can actually Google the FAC 08 documentation and what is required of utilities. It's publicly available. To my knowledge, it varies based on what they define as critical assets and infrastructure within your utility. Typically, it's certain generation sites, and typically from a voltage classification, 115 kV is on the lower end of what I've seen, but it depends on the situation. If there's a particular transmission or sub-transmission which is classified by their criteria as critical, it might meet that requirement. I don't think it'll ever go all the way down to distribution, though, as far as I see it. I do have one closing question here for Gary, and I'll try to give my answer to it after Gary's to see how we differ on each other.
Put me on.
But my closing question to Gary is, as you've worked with utility customers on deploying these solutions, what would you see as the biggest hurdle, the biggest pain point when it comes to actually implementing the different solutions? How do you see that?
No, good question. I think obviously adoption is one of the critical elements, and I think the more a project that is contemplating these types of technology, you really have to work with the end user workforce to make sure that you demonstrate some level of what's in it for them. I mean, obviously the idea that we may, through their work process, eliminate all, or most, if not all, of their reporting requirements is a huge benefit for the end work and the front end worker. So if I can show you that by leveraging this technology and doing your work, at the end of finishing or completing a job, you press send and basically that report goes up and you don't have to document anything, I think it can be a really big benefit. So I think always the goal is to find what's in it for all of the constituents in a project like this. And I think from the end user perspective, we really have to show them why this is a big benefit to them in their day. And one other thing I'll say, and then I'll let you answer that to conclude your answer to that question. But the other thing on FAC 08, that last question, I think is important to note is there's no, I don't know that there's any rocket science in what we showed you in that FAC 08 inspection. I mean, it's basically an inspection. And while NERC may not require that level of inspection associated with reliability on the distribution grid, there are millions of other distribution-oriented inspections that happen, and you can definitely use this technology for that kind of capability. So while NERC may not require it, I think the same concept definitely holds true for distribution. So Zach, I'll let you I'll use a Zach to end, and then I'll let you throw that last question back at you.
Yeah. So proof of concepts in my eyes are easier to get deployed. Typically there's budget allocated for some type of innovative proof of concept, or the dollar values for them are low enough that a particular department might be willing to take it on their overheads to give it a try. I see the biggest hurdle is when you start to scale the solution out, as you've touched on, Gary, a little bit, making sure that the people in the field are having their pain points, their issues actually solved is a big problem. And I think a lot of that ties into enterprise level change management. It's something that all organizations, I've struggled with it a little bit at Burns & McDonnell. I've seen all of my utility customers that I've worked with when trying to do any level of enterprise scaling. It's difficult to get a lot of people to change their ways. And so when you are putting business plans together for the purchase of an enterprise level solution that's going to be deployed to your organization, always think about how you're going to address change management, because it's always going to take you more time and resources than you would ever think. So make that budget fat and make sure you have the right partners engaged when it comes to change management. That's one of the reasons Burns and McDonnell partnered with Librestream, is to help provide that change management service with those enterprise deployments, be it the integration of another platform like SAP Maximo from a technical standpoint, as well as just helping the boots on the ground and the managers take that change, implement it into their current processes, because you can throw $10 million at a system easy peasy. What isn't easy is getting people to actually use it. They'll typically default to their past ways if they can. So that's what I'll end on, is just always think about change management if you can, and the people side of implementing a new process and technology.
Well, thank you very much, Zachary and Gary. Great presentation. I want to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the T&D World website within 24 hours. You'll be notified via email when the archive is available. Any questions we may not have gotten to during the live event, we'll be sure to get back to you via email. On behalf of T&D World, I'd like to thank Burns & McDonnell for sponsoring today's event, and of course, all of you for joining. Have a great day.